The crystal chandelier above table number 1 refracted the ballroom's amber light into 1,000 jagged, microscopic blades across the white linen. I sat perfectly still, tracing the rim of my water glass with my index finger, feeling the condensation gather and drip like cold sweat onto the silver placemat. The Grandeur Hotel's grand ballroom was packed with 200 guests, an ocean of silk, fake diamonds, and suffocating designer perfumes. It was supposed to be an intimate dinner for my 10th wedding anniversary with Mark. But my mother-in-law, Eleanor, had hijacked the event. She turned it into a theatrical display of her supposed aristocratic status, a stage to parade her blue blood pedigree to her country club sycophants. The sound of a silver spoon tapping against crystal shattered the low hum of classical music. Eleanor stood up at the head of the table, her neck draped in a gaudy, synthetic pearl necklace she swore was a family heirloom. She smoothed down her heavily embroidered gown, looking down her nose at me. I was wearing a simple, unbranded black dress I bought off the rack for $43. To Eleanor, my attire was an unforgivable insult to her aesthetic. To me, it was a comfortable uniform. She had spent the last decade treating me like a stray dog her son had brought home out of pity. She constantly reminded everyone that I was a mere freelance bookkeeper with no family, no connections, and no inherited wealth. She evaluated human worth entirely by the labels stitched into their collars and the zip codes of their mortgages. What Eleanor did not know, what no one in this room knew, was that the very ground she stood on belonged to me. My secret holding company, Athelgard Financial, owned a 60% majority stake in the Grandeur Hotel chain. My personal liquid assets currently sat at a quiet, unbothered $412,850,900. I drove a 10-year-old sedan not because I could not afford a Bentley, but because I found ostentatious displays of wealth profoundly vulgar. I preferred the silent, absolute power of capital. Mark's prestigious job at the investment firm, a subsidiary of my empire. Eleanor's luxury leased penthouse, managed by my real estate trust. I had kept my empire hidden to protect my marriage from the corrupting influence of greed. But the marriage was already corrupt. It was rotten to its very core, built on a lie so monstrous it defied comprehension. 3 weeks ago, Mark and I bought a commercial DNA testing kit, a trivial, amusing activity to trace ancestry for our 2 young children. The results had pinged my secure inbox at exactly 8 in the morning today. The report did not just show genetic origins. It flagged an absolute, horrific biological anomaly. Mark and I shared exactly 12.5% of our DNA. We were first cousins. The aristocratic late husband Eleanor constantly bragged about was not Mark's biological father. His real father was my estranged, degenerate uncle. Attention, everyone, Eleanor's shrill voice echoed through the microphone, her lips curled into a condescending smile. 10 years, who would have thought, when my successful, brilliant son brought home a girl with such humble, common beginnings. I prayed for the best. Scattered, polite laughter rippled through the ballroom. I've always said pedigree matters. Bloodlines dictate success. Tonight, I propose a toast to Mark, who has carried our elite heritage with grace, despite the heavy, uncultured burden he chose to drag along with him. She looked directly at me, her eyes gleaming with malice. Perhaps 10 years of charity is enough, Mark. It's never too late to find an equal. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my ice water, letting the coldness center my rage. Mark stood up from his chair, adjusting the lapels of his $4,000 bespoke suit. He shot a charming, practiced smile at the audience, a smile I now knew was biologically intertwined with my own bloodline. The realization made a wave of nausea rise in my throat, but my expression remained carved from ice. He did not defend me. He never did. Instead, he placed a patronizing hand on my shoulder, his fingers heavy and suffocating. Now, Mother, let's not be too harsh on our little bookkeeper, Mark chuckled, his voice echoing through the opulent room. She tries her best to comprehend our world, even if the intricacies of our high society life escape her. She is a quaint reminder of where we shouldn't look for partnerships. The crowd murmured in agreement. Eleanor beamed, her synthetic pearls catching the light. She gestured toward a young, striking woman in a shimmering ruby gown seated at the adjacent table. Exactly, Mark. That is why I took the liberty of inviting Victoria tonight. Her father is the CEO of Apex Global, and he just closed a massive merger with your firm. Eleanor looked down at me, her gaze dripping with sheer contempt. Now, Victoria is the caliber of woman a man of your pedigree deserves to associate with. A woman who understands luxury, legacy, and the heavy crown of elite genetics. Victoria stood, gliding over to Mark and extending a perfectly manicured hand. Mark took it, pressing his lips against her knuckles with exaggerated gallantry. A profound pleasure, Victoria. Our family could certainly use more refined, sophisticated company. It gets rather exhausting carrying dead weight. I did not flinch. I did not cry. I simply reached into the small, scuffed leather clutch resting on my lap. Beneath the heavy linen tablecloth, hidden from their arrogant eyes, my phone screen glowed. I opened a secure, encrypted channel to my lead corporate attorney, David Sterling. I had spent the last 8 hours since receiving the DNA report methodically dismantling my husband's entire life. Now, it was time to finalize the execution. My thumbs moved with surgical precision over the glass screen. Initiate Protocol Blackwood. Terminate Mark's employment contract at Ethelgard's subsidiary group immediately. Revoke his corporate access cards, freeze the joint accounts, and initiate eviction proceedings on Eleanor's penthouse. File the annulment papers based on the enclosed DNA fraud dossier. Send. The message transmitted instantly. I locked the screen and placed the phone back into my clutch. The digital guillotine had dropped. The silence in my mind was absolute, a stark contrast to the lively, clinking glasses around me. Look at her, Eleanor sneered, leaning closer to me so only the head table could hear. Not even a word of defense. Just sitting there, utterly pathetic. I don't know why you don't just pack your cheap bags and leave through the service elevator right now. You are an embarrassment to the name we carry. I am simply enjoying the champagne, Eleanor, I replied quietly, my voice barely above a whisper, yet completely steady. It is a vintage 1996 Dom Perignon. It requires a certain stillness to fully appreciate the finish. Mark scoffed, shaking his head at Victoria. She read that on a menu once. She doesn't know the first thing about fine wine. I watched the golden bubbles rise in my crystal flute, listening to the rhythmic ticking of the antique grandfather clock in the corner of the ballroom. 3 minutes. In exactly 3 minutes, the server farm in Geneva would process the directives, and the reality they thought they controlled would disintegrate into dust. The trap was set, locked, and armed. The antique grandfather clock struck the quarter hour. A sharp, synchronized cascade of notification chimes shattered the ambient noise of the ballroom. Mark's custom platinum smartphone vibrated aggressively against the mahogany table. 2 seconds later, Eleanor's diamond-encrusted device buzzed inside her purse. Then, the phones of 3 other firm executives seated at table 4 lit up simultaneously. The Geneva servers had executed the commands flawlessly. Mark casually picked up his phone, still offering a practiced, aristocratic smile to Victoria. "Pardon me." "Business never sleeps," he chuckled, swiping the screen. I watched the blood drain from his face in real time. The arrogant flush in his cheeks vanished, replaced by a sickly, translucent pallor. His jaw slackened. The customized ringtone for his VIP banking alerts began to sound, a rapid, incessant pinging. What? What is this?" Mark stammered, his voice cracking, entirely stripped of its polished baritone. He scrolled frantically. "Termination? Effective immediately. Breach of corporate ethics?" He looked up, his eyes darting wildly toward the firm's partners at the adjacent table, who were also staring at their screens in sheer horror. Eleanor let out a sharp, undignified gasp, clutching her throat. "My cards. My exclusive platinum cards just declined my auto-renewal for the country club. Wait. An eviction notice? The penthouse lease is terminated? 30 days to vacate?" She slammed her phone onto the table, the screen cracking against a silver butter knife. "Mark, call the bank. Call your managing director. There is a catastrophic system error. I am locked out, mother," Mark shouted, panic bleeding into his tone. "My corporate credentials are gone. The joint accounts are completely frozen. Balance 0. It says the orders came directly from the majority shareholder, from Ethelgard Financial." Victoria, the supposed woman of elite caliber, abruptly took a step back. Her eyes widened with disgust as she looked at Mark's panicked state. She picked up the hem of her shimmering ruby gown and swiftly walked away from our table, wanting absolutely no part in the unfolding catastrophe. I placed my crystal flute down on the table. The soft clink sounded like a gunshot in the sudden, suffocating silence of our immediate radius. I stood up slowly, smoothing the wrinkles from my $43 black dress. The fabric felt remarkably light. "There is no system error, Mark," I stated, my voice echoing coldly across the frozen tableau. "Ethelgard Financial does not make errors. It executes directives. Specifically, my directives." Eleanor stared at me, her face contorted in a mix of fury and utter bewilderment. "You? Don't be absurd, you insignificant little bookkeeper. You don't even own the miserable sedan you drove here in." "I drove the sedan by choice, Eleanor. Just as I chose to acquire a 60% controlling interest in your son's firm 3 years ago. I am the sole proprietor of Ethelgard Financial. I own this hotel. I own the building your leased penthouse occupies. And until 3 minutes ago, I owned your son's career." I reached into my clutch and extracted a crisp folded piece of thick ivory parchment. "But the financial severing is merely administrative," I continued, my gaze locking onto Eleanor's trembling synthetic pearls. "The real tragedy is the bloodline you are so incredibly proud of." I dropped the parchment directly onto Mark's empty dinner plate. "I received the results of our children's DNA ancestry test this morning. A routine procedure." Mark stared at the document, his hands shaking so violently he could barely unfold it. "You will find on page 4, Mark, that we share exactly 12.5% of our DNA, I announced, projecting my voice just enough so the surrounding tables could hear every single syllable. "You are my first cousin. Your late, supposed blue-blood father was a fiction. Your actual biological father is my estranged uncle, a man who died penniless in a state facility." Eleanor let out a primal, suffocating gasp, clutching her synthetic pearls so tightly the strings snapped. The tiny white beads cascaded onto the marble floor, bouncing away like the shattered fragments of her fabricated life. "No, it's a lie," she wheezed, her heavily powdered face turning a ghastly shade of gray as she frantically tried to gather the cheap beads. "My husband was a pure-blood Montgomery. You forged this document." I did not raise my voice. I merely looked down at her with absolute clinical detachment. "The laboratory is federally certified, Eleanor. Your decades of pathological deception are officially a matter of public medical record. You built your entire identity on a foundation of lies, judging others for the exact poverty you were desperately hiding in your own blood." Mark stumbled backward, his $4,000 suit suddenly looking like a cheap, ill-fitting costume. He looked at the official DNA report, then at me, and finally at his mother. The horror in his eyes was absolute. His grand elite world had collapsed in exactly 4 minutes. He fell to his knees, not out of remorse but out of pure, unadulterated financial terror. His trembling hands grasped at the hem of my $43 dress. "Please," Mark begged, his voice a pathetic, high-pitched whine that echoed through the silent room. "Please, we have children. You can't just take everything away from us. I am your husband. I am family." "We are indeed family, Mark," I replied, stepping back smoothly so his hands slipped off my dress and hit the cold marble. "First cousins, to be exact, which is precisely why our marriage is legally null and void, and why I owe you absolutely nothing in alimony. The children will be provided for through an ironclad, heavily restricted trust that neither of you will ever have access to. As for you and your mother, you have 30 days to vacate my properties. I suggest you start packing tonight." The ballroom, previously buzzing with the arrogant chatter of high society, was now trapped in a deafening, paralyzed silence. 200 guests, executives, socialites, and supposed friends watched the spectacular implosion of the Montgomery legacy. Not a single person stepped forward to offer comfort. They were opportunists, and they had just witnessed the alpha of their pack get slaughtered. They were already calculating how to distance themselves from the radioactive fallout of Mark's termination and Eleanor's public disgrace. I turned my back on the head table, the sound of my sensible, low-heeled shoes clicking rhythmically against the polished floor. Behind me, Eleanor began to wail, a wretched, guttural sound of a woman mourning the sudden, violent death of her bank accounts. I did not look back. I simply walked out the grand double doors of my hotel, stepping into the cool, crisp night air, finally breathing freely for the first time in a decade. True wealth is never measured by the logos stitched into our garments, the zip codes of our residences, or the fabricated pedigrees we use to elevate ourselves above others. It is measured by the quiet, unshakable integrity of our actions and the genuine kindness we extend to those we believe can do nothing for us. Arrogance is a fragile, hollow fortress, easily dismantled by the relentless, unyielding force of truth. When people evaluate human worth solely through the distorted lens of money and status, they inevitably blind themselves to the very reality that sustains them. The ultimate tragedy of vanity is not the eventual loss of material possessions, but the complete forfeiture of one's soul in the pursuit of an illusion. Vengeance, in its purest and most elegant form, does not require malice, screaming, or cruelty. It simply requires removing the unearned privileges from those who lack gratitude, allowing the brutal, unfiltered weight of their own choices to crush them.